Hey there, King of Kings family. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Sunday Sermons. I'm Dan Hoppin, the director of small groups here at King of Kings, and I just love this podcast because it's our opportunity to further explore topics from Sunday messages and dig deeper than those precious 35 minutes on a Sunday allow. Joining me, as always, is King of Kings director of ministry and a man who, as we all unfortunately learned on Ugly Christmas Sweater Sunday, is bold enough to wear a romper, Mike White.
Yeah, it's good to be here. The romper may have transformed my life, so it's good to,
It transformed a lot of lives, I think.
I don't know if it was all positive always, but
it's a thing we can't
reactions.
unsee.
That's true.
And we also have best-selling author and one of our teaching pastors here at King Kings, Zach Zehnder. Welcome, Zach.
Well, thanks, Dan. It's good to be here, and it didn't transform many lives in a positive direction, just if you're seeking clarity.
Yeah, but it also fuels the core ministry, so that's a good,
Yes, there's a lot of extra counseling sessions scheduled
because of
this
that.
week.
Male rompers were a big thing a few years ago. Do you remember that?
I do remember they came out. I think Peter and I talked about,
And how do you feel now after donning one?
It's real comfortable, man. I think
He's bought 6 since.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's get into our topic today because I think it's a fascinating one, but it's also going to be challenging and convicting for a lot of people, and I absolutely include myself in that category. Zach, you recently gave a message about smartphones and how they can be either a terrific servant or a terrible master, depending on how we use them. What inspired you to speak on this topic?
I think two things. Number one, I don't feel like in the church as a whole, we've given too many messages or counsel or godly direction on how to steward these things in our lives. So number one, it was like, this is something that has to be talked about. And the real reason, number two, is like we're using these things a lot. The average American, I think it's around 5 hours a day. And
5.4.
Yeah. So if it's that much a part of our lives and we haven't had some good conversation and intentionality behind these devices, that was kind of the genesis of why I felt like as we did this series, stewarding 4 different gifts that things that could be gifts that God gives to us, we need to have a conversation about this. And that's why I made the list to have a healthy, robust dialogue, which now I'm hoping we can, or no, it was a monologue. I just pretty much said what I wanted. And now we're having a dialogue.
It's a dialogue now, yes.
So yeah, there you go.
So I'm just going to open it real broad. Can smartphones and Christianity exist?
I hope so. Because I don't think either one's going away. I know that the gates of hell won't prevail against Christianity in the church, and from the trends that we're seeing with smartphones and the usage, they're not going away either. So it's not can they have to, is my opinion. And I do believe they ought to and can coexist. Obviously, there's a lot to them. And so the question is, how do we coexist with them?
Mike, you shared a really interesting podcast with us as we were preparing to have this conversation. The guest on this podcast was Doug Smith, who is the author of a book called Unintentional: How Screens Secretly Shape Your Desires and How You Can Break Free. Now, this guy is very anti-smartphone. And at one point in the podcast, he said, there are studies that show brain chemistry and dopamine cycles that happen with social media activities activate the same systems in your brain as heroin and drugs. This is not a tool to bend to our will. The tool you're looking for is authentic relationships and discipleships. So I'd love to get an answer from both of you. How would you respond to him?
Well, I think Doug went really far the other way. And I wouldn't be that extreme, but I thought he had some good points. And one of his comments that stood out to me was that maybe it's not a neutral item, that they're designed to be addictive and user-friendly, and then it causes reactions in the brain. And social media is done the same way. I think we talked before maybe about the social dilemma, that the movie, you see all these high executives in tech companies that say, I wouldn't let my kids do this because they know how they're designed with intention. So I think that's really good awareness as we approach it, but I think it's a false dichotomy to say you're in or you're out. It's like, okay, kind of like Zach was saying, how do you know what you're getting into? How do you steward them well? I would say one of the challenges is, I think in my student ministry days, parents just give kids access to this with no guidance, no support, no awareness, no monitoring. And then that's where you have issues. And then secondarily, how do we as the church speak on this in a healthy way and equip them well?
Yeah, and I've always, a couple things in that, Mike. Parents typically complain about their kids' screen time usage. And I get it. As a parent, I get it. But at the same time, like, I'm the parent.
So yeah, you're the one who's dictating that.
Whose responsibility ultimately is it? It's on parents. And so when they're under our roof, like, we do have the option to limit and to do what we want with what we think is best for them. Yeah, I think I listened to that podcast and I appreciate the perspectives. I'll take his words that it does the same as heroin and drugs. Hopefully I don't have that experience. And so I don't know if that's what it feels like to be on social media. I don't know that I want to do drugs. So that's another good thing there. But I think, where I was struggling a little bit with him is this sort of neutral, are screens amoral or not? And I don't know. I'm struggling with that because there are things you can do with a smartphone that are absolutely incredible. And that was the point of the message, I think, is like, stewarded in the right way. This is a really powerful tool that could more effectively spread the cause of Christ than ever before. And at the same time, I recognize its highly addictive patterns, and left to our own devices, this will become a vice for us if it's unchecked. For most people, we will naturally, it won't be a good thing for us. But then I also look at even the structures that we have for church today, right? The buildings that we have. This is what's always been passed down to us. You could say that the way it's amoral, even the structure of how we've formed our churches. And what I'm trying to say is the way we've done church, the way we've thought about church, there's a really flawed way that the church is going about doing church in the last couple decades. And you look at people's opinions from the outside of what the church is and how many leaders have fallen and the morality. And so, like, my thing is, we're ripe with sin everywhere, no matter what system we choose. And so whether it's amoral or not, like, we've got to figure out, like, how to use these things well, because they're a part of our lives. Just like we need to figure out, how do we transform the current structure and model and system of church that we have today so that we're choosing the right decisions and we're honoring Christ. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, I think other things would have a similar dopamine release too. I don't know, chocolate, food, those sorts of things. I mean, they can have that as well. So I think it's probably just a helpful descriptor for parents and for ourselves to know the potential with this. So I might shift away from saying it is a neutral tool to saying it's potentially really addictive. Mm-hmm. And so social media, so really be careful and have good boundaries when you use it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But on the flip side, Zach, you said this could be the most powerful tool in the history of mankind when it comes to sharing Christ and his truth. Just talk a little bit more about that. What makes you say that?
Yeah, you look at, today I was looking at the Bible verse already of John 14:12, where Jesus, talks to the disciples in the middle of this 4-chapter prayer. And he proclaims to them, one of the verses that kind of stops me in my tracks is like, "You'll do greater things than I." And it's like, what, Jesus? Already up in the point of the Gospel of John, you've changed water into wine, you've walked on water, you've fed 5,000 with boys' lunch, raised your friend Lazarus from the dead. It's like, how am I going to do? What are you talking about, Jesus? And so I think the unique perspective we have and sort of the greater things is not like in miracles or in number of what we do, but the magnitude and the amount of reach that's possible today with these devices. We have the opportunity to communicate the gospel to a number of people that Jesus didn't have when he walked this earth. He was he was very constrained in a geographical area. He was one body. He put himself in this body, thank God, for our sake. And so the ability that we have through these to get the message out and to be a witness and to be light in the darkness, I think is greater than we've ever gotten. And there's tools and there's apps that can help us. And so, firstly, as a disciple, there are tools on my phone that help grow me as a disciple. The YouVersion Bible app is an incredible app that I can check in and I can do Bible reading plans. There's prayer apps on my phone. There's Right Now Media app, which we use at our church for small group or personal development and discipleship. And so all these are really great. But even things like, for instance, for me, YouTube and Apple Podcasts, I know there's a lot of junk on there, but man, there's so much wisdom and truth about God on there that becomes for me likely the number one content consuming that I do as a disciple, and a disciple is a consumer and a contributor, but a consumer is still an important piece of that. And I consume legitimately hours of discipleship content every single week that is a part of my transformation process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I want to bring it up. Mike, you introduced me to a pastor, Ben Stewart. I believe he's a pastor at a church in Washington, D.C., if I'm correct. I would have, if not for my phone, I would have no ability to hear him and listen to him. And I have been so blessed by his messages over the past couple months since you introduced him. So that's an example right there of, without my phone, I'm not getting that. I'm getting discipled by a guy who I will probably never meet, probably never see in person, probably never be within 500 miles of, and yet he's touching my life and changing me.
The only problem with Ben, though, is he has a lot of Texas opinions that Mike would have too. So you got to take the take the good with the bad. Take the meat there and leave the bones.
Yeah, and he's an Aggie, so that's like a weird. He's
true.
One of my favorite. And I think too. Think about first century early church, like how the church spread, and it was slow and it was kind of persecution and it was person to person and like that, right? And then think Martin Luther's time, Scripture wasn't available for people, and so they were relying upon the priests, and it got dangerous because if there was a corrupt priest or corrupt system, they would hear that and trust that as the word of God. And so, like Zach was saying, now think digitally, the Bible is everywhere, and how accessible it is, and the power the word of God has to change lives. So in persecuted countries, maybe missionaries, it's hard there, but how easily is it to get the word of God shared with people? So I think that speaks to the power of the medium digital.
Mm-hmm. And yes, there is a lot of power on the good, but as we've discussed a little bit, there's a lot of power on the other side too. And I think when a lot of people associate the negatives with smartphones, the thinking goes to social media, which is just a dangerous, addictive trap. And in fact, Zach, you shared in your message, social media for the average American is responsible for 2 hours and 24 minutes of time spent online daily, which is just an insane number. But Zach, in your message, you said, I don't believe God has called us to escape social media. God has not called us to delete all our social media accounts and never be online and to go back to flip phones. What makes you say that?
I have a friend, by the way, from college. I see him every year. And he had a flip phone every single year, except this year he finally switched an iPhone. And so it's nice. And the text messages now, I get the blue bubbles, not the weird whatever.
How's he doing with it? Like, give us what's the
he's fine, but he had, again, 2 decades where most people, not quite 2 decades, 15 years where most people had a smartphone, and he had the flip phone. So he had some really good principles in place already. But the phone carrier companies made it nearly impossible. The flip phones are actually more expensive for him to continue on that than have a smartphone. He's like, at the end of the day, it was a financial thing for him. But yeah, your question there is interesting. And so what I mean by that is, as a whole, collectively, Christians cannot completely escape social media. We need to provide light. And I do think, every time Jesus talks about, you're the light of the world, we know light, and light shines most prominently in darkness. And I think Christians are really good at shining light in already lit places. In other words, conversations with you guys, I don't mind talking about my faith and who Jesus is, because I know you're going to receive that, and we're going to have good, healthy, robust conversations around what it looks like to be a follower of Christ. But on social media, there's so much there, again, good and bad. And it's our call to be a light into these places and into the common public places. You see Paul do this in Acts on Mars Hill. He was speaking and had a voice and a message that cut through everything else. And we need to be that. We need to provide that light. And so I want to be real clear here, though. I do think that there are people that ought not be on Christians that ought not be on social media. There are times when God calls a person to not be a part of that because it's either too addictive for them, they don't like the patterns and behaviors that they end up reproducing when they're there. And so I think that's very healthy to do that. But as a whole, I do think we have to be a light in this darkness. Otherwise, where are people? It's where the people are. And so where are they going to hear the good news if everybody who's Christian abandons these medium? And so not everybody needs to escape all of them. And then Christians, and you don't need to be on every single platform too. So right. I think it's like wise on, for me personally, I've chosen to be on Facebook. It was the one I first got in. I realize it's a little bit of an older crowd now, but like it's the one where I'm the most active. It's where my peers are the most active, even more pastors, which I talk to a lot of pastors. Like that's the number one that they're on. And so that's the medium that I typically use. I was on Instagram, but I deleted my account. Instagram's too dangerous for me, truthfully, because you log onto Instagram and you've got beautiful Bible verses there that inspire you. And then right next to that is a woman in a bikini. And whether that woman in a bikini is there because of my algorithm or because your friends are looking, there's just weird. And if your eyes linger for a few seconds too long because of something that's attractive, like, you can't, it's hard to go back on that. And so I had to delete that. And so I don't have that. I have a business Instagram, but it's not even an app on my phone and I don't even run that. And so it is important to think about what social media can I be a part of, but collectively, we can't completely abandon it. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I agree. Like, I recognize in my life, Twitter was not a healthy thing for me. It was great in a former job when I was a sports reporter, but now there's just so much negativity on that. So I still have my account, and I usually post a Bible verse every morning. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a big foodie. So if I go have a big meal, a great meal, like I'll post some pictures, try and get some publicity out for that restaurant or that business. But other than that, I try to stay off it because I know that it's a dangerous thing for me, and it'll just put me in a negative headspace to interact with people on there. And Mike, I know that you're someone who has pretty much taken yourself off basically all social media platforms. Can you just kind of talk about what went into that decision for you?
Yeah, I've been completely off for 4 or 5 months, whatever it is now. I think for me, I've said it before, is at best, it was a waste of time. I mean, I think there could be connections with old friends and you get updates on people like that, friends from Texas, et cetera. You see scripture, you see good things like that. But for me, it just became a waste of time. And kind of like Zach was saying, Instagram was a really dangerous thing too, for that exact same reason he said. So, or the negativity, the political stuff, I think in the last few years, you just saw people just getting so amped up and just saying things that you would get angry. So I don't know. I found myself frequently leaving social media worse than I started, if that made sense. And so just quit and been okay since that. So yeah.
I don't know, man. You showed up in a romper off the other day, so
maybe that was the gateway to the romper. Who knows what's coming next, guys? But I do kind of like Zach said. I also think now you're seeing it as a front door for church and ministry, whereas years ago you would drive by and see a church and not know much about it, and now, along with a website, people are checking out social media of a church to see a personality and style and what they're celebrating and what they're doing. And so it can be a great ministry tool as well. And I think we use ours pretty well.
Yeah, here at King of Kings, I think our social media accounts are very well run, but we also have a culture that our staff really shares a lot of stuff on our personal pages too. And I know we're recording this right before Christmas, and I shared one of our Christmas invitation Instagram posts, and I had a guy reach out to me who I'd never met in person and was like, "Hey, tell me more about this. Like, how do I reserve a seat?" And that's somebody who we probably never would have reached. And he, I don't know if he'll come in our doors on Christmas Eve, but he might. And that's kind of the power of social media. And again, it's not the calling on everyone to be on social media to put that out there, but I think that does speak to the positive power that it can have. But going back to the negative side, I feel like smartphones, they give us this feeling that we always have to be on. And I know that I feel this personally, whether it's keeping up with what's going on social media, responding to messages on social media, even text messages. Like, as soon as I feel that buzz of my phone, I feel like I need to pull it out and respond immediately because somebody's waiting for an answer from me. And if they don't get it, they're going to be like, well, what the heck? Where's Dan? I need this. How do we set like healthy limits and healthy guidelines to how we use this and how quickly we feel like we need to respond to people and be on all the time?
That's hard. Yeah,
it's really hard.
I think I realized this personally, and I don't want to come off as like the expert that I've got everything under control, because I'm with those statistics of average screen time. I'm better on social media, but anyway, it's not comparative. But I'm with I'm on it hours a day, and so I have these conversations with my kids because I look at their screen time, they look at mine, and they're, Dad, you've got this many. I'm like, yeah, but my hours are productive here and here. If you take this app out and this app out, then you got this, and I'm doing this. So anyway, the constantly on is a big piece, and where I recognized it for me is actually in the middle of writing Being Challenge, which would have been 2019, was the bulk of the writing. And because I was writing on solitude and things like this, and I'm like, I can't have solitude and really focused time with God whenever my phone's with me, and when my watch is with me, and when my computer's next to me. And so what can I do? So for me, it was recognizing, unless you do something and be more than intentional, but actually put an action with your intention, it's going to overtake you. And so for me, the one thing that I think I've kept forward from that time a few years ago that's made a big difference, and again, not perfect, is I disabled every single notification on my phone. Everything, even texts from important people that I love, including my wife. And I've probably had 2 or 3 times in the past 3 years, 4 years, where that's been like, oh, shoot, I really needed to have seen that immediately. But the plus side is, I think from the phone pickup standpoint, I went from in the notifications pickup, I went from like 150, 170 a day to closer to 30 or 40. And that's probably still too many, but it's a heck of a lot better. And so constantly being on, how do you fix that? You have intention, but you put a little bit of action behind it. And that's just one thing that I've done, and it's still not perfect, but it hasn't gotten me into trouble missing a text or being the 4th person in a group to respond to a text. It rarely gets me in trouble. So yeah.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to your message on how do we shape the technology and not let it shape us. And so notifications is one. I think for me, I found probably early on with smartphones and kids, like you're paying attention to your phone and not your kids. And it's like, shoot. Okay. So then put it to sleep, whatever. At dinner, phones are at the table. We put them to sleep, you put them away, and you can focus. So I think it's how do you use these well and not let the technology use you, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Zach, you talked about using your smartphone as a way to shine a light or be a light in the darkness. Especially in social media where there's so much negativity, we can use this to be a megaphone for Christ. And we talked a little bit about like sharing King of Kings posts. What are some other strategies that people can take to be that light in the darkness on social media?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but I think, so obviously sharing what God is doing in your life, I think sharing Bible verses and things like that are beautiful. But I would also say if you're just regularly engaging on social media, just being generous with your thoughts. How about this? Giving the other person the benefit of the doubt before you respond, and not visualizing this worst case scenario story. I think that so many times being so combative right up front, I think that makes you that way when you're like seeing that person in the worst light. So what would it look like for you to see them in the best light? Remember that everybody's going through something. Everybody has a story. Even a lot of the posts that are out there that you may want to respond to or feel the need to, like there's usually something bigger and behind it that probably won't get shared on social media, if that makes sense. And so I think giving the benefit of the doubt. And so what I would say too, like for me is, again, do what you can. And so for me, it's like choose one way on social media that you're going to bring light into the darkness. And so what is that? What is that for you specifically? Because that's different for you and for me. And so like for next year, or by the time this airs, it's current year 2023, I've really thought about, I've got a Facebook group called Red Letter Pastors, and it's a group of church leaders and pastors. And it's like, this is the group that I want to really highly engage with. I want to share resources. I want to hear best practices from them, understand who they are, be a help to them, and then be a help to me. And there's this beautiful community that's forming there that is really where I feel like in 2023, that's that's the piece God's kind of put in my world. So for you, it may be different, but what is that one way that you can shine the light of Christ in social media?
I'm not on it, but I would add, Zach, you touched on it. Maybe what you don't do on social media is as important as what you do, where it's just become this war zone and combative. And I just don't think Christians look great over the last handful of years with all the tough, contentious issues we saw. And I don't think any argument was ever won on social media, but people continue to think it is and just press in and just battle, and it just doesn't turn out well.
Can I go further with that? Because I think that that's such a big thing I've noticed as a pastor is people, I don't think, are really great at handling conflict today. They'll either avoid it or they'll put it on social media. And both of those are pretty horrible options. And I've never seen, like you said, Mike, I've never seen a conflict that's been taken onto social media. Like, I've never looked at it and be like, wow, the light of Christ was really shown in that. But I've seen it tear apart relationships, friendships, families, and gotten to a place where they've become such enemies and so divisive that, like, it's really sad. And this is not non-Christians, by the way, I'm talking about. This is people that are firm in their faith, at least ought to be. And it's like, that was a lie from the enemy that you bought into, that it would be wise to put that up there. And so I would, highly recommend never taking conflict to social media.
And I think it might have been the politics podcast we did, but we lose the image of God when you're seeing people through screens. So you get one opinion about them, then you foster even a greater opinion that's negative narrative about them, and you continue down and it becomes aggressive. So face to face, it's much harder to say those same things. So I think remembering the image of God and who people are is huge.
Mm-hmm. So let's resolve this romper conflict right now, Mike, since we're, I'm just kidding.
Well, I think this all plays into something else interesting that Doug Smith said on that podcast you shared, Mike. And again, he's very extreme on one end of this, but he made the contention that by using social media platforms like TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook, we're justifying them. And he even went as far as to say, if all the kids are smoking crack, should I go smoke crack with them and share the gospel with them? Obviously, I think that's a little extreme. I can also see where he's coming from to some extent. How do you guys respond to that? What do you think about that comment?
I mean, first I would say it's sensationalist.
Well,
you know what I mean? It's super extreme to kind of hammer home his point. I think kids and adults are using social media, so they're going to be on there. And in some ways, maybe it parallels Jesus seeking out people in dark places, but obviously having boundaries and what's ethical based on our Christian faith. So you would say smoking crack is not. I mean, is using social media wrong? I don't know. I mean, I think he would land there. I don't think I would. I could see it as being an addictive tool, but yeah, it can be a light, like Zach was saying earlier, and knowing that people are going to be on this platform. So how do you share Jesus on that platform can be positive.
If I remember, I listened to that podcast. It's sensational because I think he was in this world, right? Professionally, he was pretty involved in the decisions and the things. And so he sees more than even you and I see. Social Dilemma was a great movie that he referenced that, like, he saw a lot of that. So that's why I think he's being sensational. So my answer is no, you shouldn't smoke crack with him. But you probably, if you don't have a crack smoking problem, you ought to figure out a way to hang out with him or get someone to hang out with him who knows Jesus so they can hear. And the other point, again, I want to come back to is a lot of these kids that are on social media right now would have as much of, if not more, negativity towards the system and model that we've adopted as church for the last 1,700 years, since Constantine made Christianity the public religion. They see so much immoral, egregious acts that have been done that they would probably say something similar to the current model we have. And I don't think they're far off. And I don't think Doug's far off in what he said. It's a matter of, like, every system is flawed, and the key is figuring out your role in it.
I would also argue, like, crack didn't exist in Jesus's day, but if it did, yeah, Jesus would have he wouldn't have smoked crack with people, but that's who he went to. He gravitated towards prostitutes, towards sinners, towards tax collectors who were cheating people, drunkards. These were the people that Jesus went to and he embraced. So yeah, Doug, like, no, we're not going to go join people who are smoking crack, but we need to go to the people who are struggling, who need that light in the darkness. And social media might be the only way to get to them at some point. Last thing that I want to touch on before we get out of here is you guys are both dads. And you've talked a little bit, especially you, Mike, with the dinner table conversation. But how do you, especially in an age where you're not around your kids all the time. You guys both have teenage kids. They have smartphones. How do you control, maybe not control is the right word, but just like monitor their smartphone usage so their phone is not becoming a terrible master?
Yeah, I think we stepped into it too. We were probably behind the curve. Zach, I know we've talked about it before. I'm curious your experience also, but we were late to the game on smartphones. We were late to the game on social media. And I think knowing your kids will be on their own at some point. So how do you set a foundation so they can be responsible and make wise decisions for themselves? So let them know the power, let them know boundaries, talk about responsibility, talk about the dangers of it. We check our son's phone, our daughter's phone, and we talk through things on there. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think you set guidelines, parameters, create trust. They get a little bit more leeway as they kind of go and show good usage. And again, we saw in pandemic, it's a great way to connect with friends online. So it's not all bad. Again, it's a powerful tool. We saw with our daughter, one of her good friends lives in Connecticut. And so they were able to reconnect and hang online through Roblox, which is taking over the world. I don't know if your kids did Roblox or Brady does, but
I'm so old, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, you're pretty old, man. So I don't know. I think healthy boundaries, open conversation, no secrecy. We're going to check your phones. We're going to talk about things. Zach, what do you?
Yeah, everything you said, Mike, ditto to that. I also would say to any parent, like Mike and I are in the first generation to ever raise kids that have grown up fully digitally. And so we have a God of grace. And so tons of grace, I think, ought to be applied to parents who are figuring this out. Nobody's ever had to do this before as parents. And so I would say, learning on the job and probably recognizing more failures collectively than victories. And so everything Mike said, I think, is really great. Checking their screen time, what they're looking at, having regular conversation with them is all things that are appropriate, and we do. My wife is a huge champion in this. I would say I read a book not long ago, like What Most Parents Aren't Telling You, and it talks about like what parents are really feeling and thinking about. Mental health was like number one overall for parents. And that like wasn't on my parents' radar for me and for their kids. And so we're dealing with that. I think a lot of that stems from the smartphone, digital crazed world we live in. But I would say this is one of the top 3 parenting issues and struggles that Allison and I deal with is screen time. It's what our kids want to do, and left again to their own devices, they'll choose their devices every time. And also, like, if we look at our own habits, as for me, a 39-year-old dude, and for others my age, like, I don't think we're really crushing it either. And so if we're struggling with this, who have at least more maturity and experience, our kids are going to struggle with this. And so as open as you can be in conversation, as direct as you can be, as knowledgeable as you can be, as accountable as you can be, and then also setting, again, a couple of actions that I think show that. And so what does it look like to have a screen basket at your home where for 2 hours a night or whatever, everything can go in there? What does it look like for you to do a family screen fast for a day, once a month or once a quarter? They may be little things, but at least it's attempts and steps as we give grace for one another and try to figure it out, because it's brutal. It's hard.
Yeah, those are all good. Zach, you touched on it earlier. I think parents need to stop abdicating responsibility.
Yeah.
I just hear this victim mentality of like, my kids are just on phones. Well, you're allowing it.
Yep.
And like you said, you're probably having the same issue because you're on the couch on your phone and you don't know what your kid's doing on their phone. So boundaries, set healthy parameters, communicate the expectations, and then enforce the expectations. So if it's an hour a day or whatever the rule is, then enforce it and let the kid have some freedom in when they pick and do that and what they use. But don't be victims. Stop abdicating responsibility. You're the parent. You're not the kid.
And I think if I could go on to that, I would say stop choosing comfort. because it's comfortable. It's comfortable to let my kids have their screens and for me to do what I want. And whether that's watching a show or even more work or whatever it might be, like we have to stop choosing comfort as the number one idol. And that's what I think our screens are providing for our kids and for us, is like they're just really comfortable options. And so, and even the checking in with kids and checking screen time and having conversations, those are all good things to do. None of those are comfortable or come naturally to me. They're always weird conversations. And I don't want anybody to get rose-colored glasses to think, because you and I are in ministry, that like these are really awesome conversations where we're banding together and talking about God and changing the world together as we put our devices away. Like, no, it's annoying. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. The boys don't respond super well. And that's normal. And that's what's to be expected, but that's still what's better than just being comfortable and letting everybody do their own thing, especially our kids.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the most important things as we wrap up here is something you said earlier, Zach, is just having grace. Whether you're a parent or you're an individual, give yourself some grace, because smartphones and social media, they are literally addicting. Like the algorithms, the things that are put in place on these devices are meant to make us want to come back for more and get that dopamine hit again and again and again. So it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, these are the healthy things that you should do. Here are the good ways to share, the gospel through social media. We're gonna fail. I know I'm on my phone way too much, and I'm trying to take steps to get better. But I love, what you said earlier, Zach. Like, you still feel like you're on your phone a lot, but you've decreased your usage quite a bit. You've taken tangible steps. Mike, you've removed yourself from social media. That's not an easy thing to do. Like, there are probably people that would want to communicate with you through social media, and you've said, you know what, I'm going to set a good boundary there. And I'm sure you still look at your phone plenty as well, but you have taken a tangible step. So I think those would be my two main takeaways here is A, give yourself some grace. Like, don't listen to this and just think, man, I'm on my smartphone all the time, I'm awful. Don't do that. But listen to this and realize, A, the power that your phone can have for good or for evil, and then B, take some tangible steps, do some things that ensure that you're using your smartphone in a good way, and maybe identify some ways in which it's becoming a master of you, and set up some roadblocks so that that's not the case.
Roadblocks, not roadblocks.
Right.
I just want to clarify.
Yeah. I think community in this is important. I mean, even hearing Zach talk, it's like, oh yeah, that's something we can incorporate well. Don't feel alone in this, especially the church. You have people around you. Find people with similar age kids who've been, hey, how do you approach this? Let's talk this through. There are experts online where you can find, hey, tips for social media usage with kids. So don't be alone. That's what Satan wants. And then you throw your hands up and be, I'm out.
And use the tools, right? So even here at King of Kings, we have Right Now Media. There's some really great studies on there. One by Andy Crouch called The Tech Wise Family, that everybody who's got kids and trying to figure this out like we are. So there are some resources, and that's why ultimately you came back to, why did we talk about this? Like, this is why, because it's got to be talked about. And we're not the only ones talking about it, but it's not percentage-wise probably the conversation that it ought to be for how influential these things are. So the Tech Wise Family is on Right Now Media. I believe there's a study called Redeem the Screen that's on there as well. So there's some really cool tools. There's some great accountability software if you're struggling with what you're looking at and what you're watching. And so Covenant Eyes is one that has been a leader for a long time. Another one that I think is actually, I'm thinking of switching to personally, is called Accountable, the number 2U, Accountable 2U, because it has a little bit better, I would say, tracking and reporting on mobile devices, where Covenant Eyes, I think, is really good on computers and bigger laptops and things like that. I think Accountable 2U is a up and comer when it comes to getting the computer plus the mobile. And so, as much of these boundaries and roadblocks and things you can put into place, I think the better. It's not that you can put all that stuff there and still use it in an appropriate way, and there's grace for you, and God has forgiveness for you when you do that. But the key as Christians is we want to do better because God's been so good to us. And so how many of those things can you put into your life, I think, is a really great thing to do.
Amen. Mike and Zach, thank you so much for taking the time to really go through this and dive into what's a really challenging but I think important topic to talk about today. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Beyond Sunday Sermons. Let's continue to live our faith lives beyond Sunday.